Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless, the podcast that teaches you how to live a healthier lifestyle that makes you and the planet happier. The world is changing quickly. Sometimes it feels like you can't keep up. I hear you. You want to make the world a better place, you care, but you don't know where to start. You know taking care of yourself is important, but how? I get it. I have a history of diving into a new endeavor seeking perfection and quickly feeling like I failed. Whether it was going vegan or learning how to recycle more, I wish I had guidance to keep me on track and not overwhelmed. I can't lie, the world needs your help. But it doesn't need you to be perfect. This podcast is here to help. Here we go. Today on the podcast, Emily from the Lander line is here to tell you why and how to disengage from fast fashion. I have followed your account for a while and not only endlessly inspired by your fashion, I will admit. I don't consider myself a fashion girly, but I'm like, okay, maybe. Also just your approach to talking about fast fashion and the industry itself. So I'd love to start there. You talk about fast fashion and secondhand, and I would love to know how you got into that world.
Yeah, for sure. Landerline is my account. And I also have a website where it's like just a landing space for information about what I talk about, but also some resources for people who are interested in nonprofit organizations and some other really great sources of information all around like fast fashion and the fashion industry, as well as some recommended brands. Because a lot of people ask me like, where do you shop? Most of my stuff at this point is secondhand, but I do have several small designers that I love to support. So it's all in a brand directory on my website. So I like to direct people there as well. But how I got started. So I've always been a shopper ever since I was young. I think it was very normal in my family to buy something new for any occasion to celebrate. We're bored. And it wasn't so much that we even had a ton of money. It was just like that was something that we all shared interest in. Yeah, yeah. And it was very benign. There was no like damage being done or anything like that that we knew of. But so it was just like a normal activity for me as a young person. And then as I became an adult, I felt that my interest in shopping was because of my interest in fashion. And so I was like, I love clothes. This is how I express myself creatively. This is why I do it. But it just became this cycle that I became exhausted with, particularly when I had kids and my style changed. I went through this I was on this hamster wheel of buying, returning, like this constant consumption cycle where I was never really happy with what I was getting, not knowing that what I was buying was fast fashion and having no understanding of what that meant and why I was not happy with what I was buying. And it was because of the quality and trends and things like that. And I had my son, my youngest, and I was just driving one day and it just hit me. And I was like, this is not how I want to be spending my time anymore. I've always found myself gravitating towards more sustainable practices just in general, whether it was through food or products that I brought into my home for my kids or things like that. But I didn't make the association between what the fashion industry is doing and sustainability until I dove into research for myself. And I pretty much stopped shopping because I felt like I just needed to hit a reset and have an understanding of why I was doing that, like why I was doing what I was doing. And then it was very quick where I realized there's this whole world of sustainability in the fashion industry. And I'm just like a regular person. If I didn't know about this, or if I didn't have a good understanding, so many other people don't. And that's why I decided to share what I was learning in real time. So it's become something really special in my life, and that's resonated with others who have found me. So I'm, on the side, I'm a social worker. I work in a hospital part-time. And so I'm grateful because I get to still have my career in something that I'm passionate about, but then also have this other project, this other work that I'm equally as passionate about on the side.
I love that. That's such different avenues to making the world a better place?
In my training as a social worker, we're trained to be empathetic. We're trained to think about things as a whole, like the whole person, the whole environment, the whole world, the aspects that create that whole thing. And whenever I approach something, I when I'm talking to someone, I usually don't jump to conclusions about their story. I try and listen to them, especially when I'm approaching my patients. It's like they have these, they're really sick and like they need an advocate. So that's how I approach a lot of things in my life. And so it's been really cool to pivot to Landerline, which I'm listening to a lot of people who had similar tendencies as me or still struggle with that. They still struggle with wanting to shop or using shopping as a coping mechanism. And even people who have transitioned to shopping secondhand exclusively are still over consuming, because just shopping secondhand isn't necessarily going to put a band-aid on everything. It could equally be as addictive or damaging or whatever it is. You really be ready to dive deep into what's going on with you in your life and why you're making the choices you're making in order to make an actual change.
So you're diving into the industry of fast fashion. You're driving and you're like, I cannot do this shit anymore. I just cannot. So what were you starting to find out? What were those kind of first things you were diving into that made you just totally rethink consumerism?
So I have a friend who I'm still very close with and I adore, and we were like Zara buddies. So like we would be on Zara all the time because it's inexpensive and they often have like things that are very in trend, so you feel like you're getting a really good bargain. Like any fast fashion retailer, we'd send each other things that we liked, and we were always getting like Zara boxes, and I found myself returning most of it and her the same. And so I was like, this is such a waste of my time. I do not want to be spending my time returning all this shit.
Yeah.
This is why am I doing this in the first place? And then when I realized that I wanted to just get off the ride, my actual idea for Landerline was to create an e-commerce site, almost like a Revolve, where instead of selling fast fashion, I was selling small, like independent designers and promoting like their stories and their products. But then I realized like the world really doesn't need an e-commerce site. Like we have so many already. And in order for that to be successful, I have to push people to buy things. So that just felt so wrong in what I was experiencing as a person, which was like, I want to stop buying so much. And it's funny because my friend who I'm talking about, she'll still tell me like, I'm so sorry, it's from Zara. And I'm like, it's okay. I'm not the police. I'm not going to arrest you. You have to make your own choices. You have to be ready to make changes on your own. I'm not someone who's going to enforce any of that onto the people that I care about. But then I also have friends who are like, I'm so different now. Like you've made me realize all these things, yada, yada, yada. So I take everything like with a grain of salt, and it's okay, whatever part of the journey you're on. And I tell this to whoever I'm really talking with, is that my intent is to talk to people in a way where we're taking the shame out of your consumption, because I truly believe that no productive change is going to happen from a place of judgment. Like we're not going to judge people into stopping what they're doing. And that can be for anything that we're trying to advocate for. So I really want to meet people where they're at and be open to talk about their struggles, yada, yada, yada. I still, even starting in 2021 with this, it wasn't until 2023 I started what's called the rule of 5, where I'm only buying 5 new pieces of clothing per year. So up until that point, I was still shopping and I was still supporting like ethical designers and slow fashion, but probably more than I needed to. So I'm still learning as well. Like I'm not an expert yet, which I'm open to all the things. Like I love that this has brought me so many different opportunities to meet people who have different perspectives in the industry. But I don't think that answers your question. You were like, what did you find out about fast fashion? Okay.
Everything you said was perfectly relevant and helpful.
So some of the things that like we're talking about here are just the fast fashion was designed in a way where it's fast. Like they design things fast, they make things fast, they get it out to people fast. And it just allows people to like get in this routine of, okay, they just had new arrivals. I want to see what those are because, it's almost like you need your fix. But the problem is that behind the scenes, there's so much going on that is one, negatively impacting the environment. So like a lot of the materials that fast fashion uses are synthetic and they're derived from oil and gas, high toxic chemical loads going into a lot of these designs. And the people who are manufacturing them, they're risking their health really because they're around these chemicals all the time.
And that's not the CEO of Zara who in their health. These are people
No.
who are like trying to survive.
Correct. And most of the time, I would say the CEO of any of these brands don't actually know the people who are making their clothes. They're contracting with factories overseas who are co-contracting or subcontracting with other factories. And so it's called the race to the bottom. Like most of the work that's happening is happening in really developing countries. And so people who are working on the clothes that we're wearing really are working to survive. They just don't have the same kind of infrastructure and economic support as Western countries. And so they are working really hard and not making a lot of money. There's very little regulation in the industry just as a whole. And companies are able to get away with like wage theft and modern day slavery and all these things. And they say that they don't know that's happening, or they claim like it's not happening with them. But the problem is that these factories are hiring other factories to do it. So there's very little transparency along the whole supply chain.
By design.
I think that's one of the biggest things that people in this space advocate for is like more transparency so that we can have a good understanding about how people are being treated who are making our clothes, and then we can make better choices in what we're buying. So there's many different things, but a lot of it is environmental, also just inhumane conditions and health conditions for people who are manufacturing the clothes, and just creating a world where we just want to consume more media, more clothing, more everything. It becomes such a heavy mental load, I think, for so many people. So my goal is to push back.
I so appreciate that. And I would love to dive in a little bit because you teased at it in the beginning, but so much of consumerism in how it late stage capitalism, that's a whole nother podcast episode. But the idea of consumerism, right? There's so much psychologically to it.
Yeah.
And like you said in the beginning of it takes some work to maybe undo some patterns and to really dive into, okay, why am I shopping?
Right.
You said you had that aha moment driving. I remember having a moment before I canceled my Amazon account a few like years back, was just scrolling Amazon like for shits and giggles and just browsing. And it just hit me that I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I don't need anything actually. And I'm shopping at home and I don't need anything. And all of a sudden I was just like, this feels like maybe not how I want to spend my time. And again, it's not an all or nothing and trying not to come from that place from judgment, but there is some examination to be done there of
Sure.
what is this? Why am I doing this? So it sounds like you had to have that journey a little bit too. What are some of those things that come up for people that they're avoiding or whatever else and using?
Yeah. I treat myself like a case study because I feel like I was someone who was shopping for all the different reasons. And what's funny is I would never describe my situation as a shopping addiction. It never got to a point where like I was in any kind of financial stress, and it's because I was returning so much of it. For me, it was like the buying was what it was, but then I would receive it and I would return it. So it just seemed completely pointless. I think people who I've spoken with say it's, especially women, we're influenced all the time. If you're on social media, you're being influenced. And even before social media, like there was celebrities and there were the tabloids and things like that. So we just have a long history of being marketed to.
Yeah.
So it's I think we mentally go to a place where like we feel like we need something that we don't need, but we want that instant gratification, like that instant dopamine boost that we may not be getting elsewhere. So for me, I've just pivoted towards other things that make me happy, and I'm so much
Mm,
happier. Like instead of scrolling, I'm reading, or instead of going shopping with a friend, like I'm meeting them to eat or going for a walk or things like
right.
that. Like identifying those things that still bring you joy and are actually going to be better for you in the long run, and slowly trying to replace them with whatever habit you're experiencing. But yeah, I think a lot of women struggle with being influenced, being marketed to, the pressure that they might feel from others to look a certain way. It's a whole epidemic, like for women, just how we look and how we present ourselves, how we behave. There's so many expectations. I think a lot of women participate in shopping and consumption to feel better.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that there are, like you said, there are so many reasons. I worked as an advocate for survivors of sexual assault and dating violence. And in doing that work, I remember working with someone who had been stealing kind of
Mm-hmm.
small things, and coming down to the root of it was control. And now theft versus buying, I know, is a different thing. I'm not necessarily
Right. No,
comparing,
but it's all related.
but it's all very related. This
Right.
sense of control, this sense of status, sense of creating this image, all of the things you said, right? There's so much that goes into shopping. And the thing that I always can come back to that really keeps me focused on the goal is the time. I
Mm-hmm.
remember a few years ago
Absolutely.
seeing a statistic about how much time we spend in our lives just moving things around or organizing or whatever
Yeah.
it was. And sometimes to a fault, I want to be as efficient as I can. And I'm like, that just doesn't help me in any,
Yeah.
that doesn't move the needle.
Yeah, for sure.
There's
Yeah,
just
I am trying to think what made me think of what you just said. Time
time.
spend. Oh, yeah. Even when I'm thrifting, timers are everything to me at this point in my life.
I saw that in your
Yeah,
story
like
the other
I'm
day.
obsessed with having a timer. And some people might not work for them because they don't want to feel like strapped to a timer or time limited or anything like that. But like the way my life is now, like if I can do anything, I can manage my time. And
Mm,
when I'm thrifting, I set a timer because usually I just don't have thrifting and shopping secondhand is a time privilege. A lot of people just do not have hours to search for what they're looking for. And I think that's why a lot of people use Amazon. They're like, I don't, whatever reason it is that they're not prioritizing time to look for something, that's a big plus for Amazon, right?
mhm.
So, but like when I'm thrifting, I set a timer, whether it's 15 minutes, whether it's an hour, even when I'm like scrolling on Instagram, which I actually don't really do anymore. Like my Instagram, I use solely as like a communication source and like a content platform, but I rarely find myself scrolling, but I will set a timer like 10 minutes and then I'm done. So that's really helped me. And also following those people who, there's a lot of content creators and influencers on Instagram. You have to like filter through who truly inspires you and unfollow those accounts that kind of trigger you, or where you like feel like, oh wait, I really like that. Like I mostly follow accounts where I like their style as opposed to what they are representing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. You're not following people who are pressuring you to buy or
Mhm.
that are making you feel like you're doing it wrong. It's one
Yeah.
thing, you don't want to be in an echo chamber, of course. You want to be consuming content wherever that is for you that helps you learn and
Right.
grow.
Right.
There are accounts that purely exist to sell.
Oh yeah.
And that pressure, even if you're not paying attention to it, it gets insidious. It can get in there for sure. I'd love to circle back to something you said about how I think that especially when one first kind of learns about fast fashion or just about how much of our stuff goes to landfill or doesn't get recycled, like there's that first initial, I'll just shop secondhand.
Hmm.
And you said in the beginning too, you can still overconsume instead of
Right.
And I'd love to dive into that a little bit more because I think that makes people bristle a little
I
bit.
know. I know. There's such a wonderful world of secondhand, and I'm so glad that I've embraced it because it's really the only way I shop now. Instead, as in addition to those 5 pieces of clothing, which by the way, I'm doing the rule of 5 for the second year, and it's broken into 5 seasons of the year. And so winter season started January 1 and it goes through March 8th. And I still haven't bought my first thing. So it's like coming from someone who used to love to shop, like it's actually it's a lot easier than I think a lot of people think. There are so many people who are like, I could never do that.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, there's lots of people who shop secondhand and they're like, I still buy too much. Like I have to, I can't go thrifting anymore because I want all the things. I personally can't relate to that because I think just the way I came into this journey, like secondhand feels like such a relief to me. And I've learned that just buying things to buy things, it doesn't make me happy anymore. But I understand like that can be a real struggle for people.
Right.
And what I normally do, I usually have a list of things that I'm looking for, and most of them are pretty classic items like a trench or like a pair of oversized jeans or whatever. And so I will look for those things when I'm out. So I think keeping a list is great. I'm a big list maker as well as timer user. But yeah, I think shopping secondhand can be just as addictive as shopping firsthand. If you're doing it, it's hard. There's so many elements to this subject of sustainable fashion. I think so much of what we donate and what is out there as secondhand gets landfilled, unfortunately. And that's like another tangent I can go on. So if you're buying things secondhand, that's great. But if you're buying too much secondhand, it can just cause the same amount of like anxiety or stress or whatever it is that you're trying to combat from shopping firsthand. But yeah, unfortunately, so many of our items that are donated cannot be sold in the stores, whether it's because they're damaged or they're just in unsellable condition or they're out on the floor for a certain amount of time and they didn't move, and so those donation centers have to keep moving product along. And sadly, the majority of where those textiles go in the United States is also overseas to really big landfill communities. So I think that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more innovation and more technology when we're talking about textile recycling. There's a really great company called CIRC, CIRC, and they are the first textile recycling company who have been able to figure out the science of taking like a polyester cotton, which normally can't be recycled. I think what's often misunderstood is that you can just take textiles and make them into another textile. But if you're actually talking about true textile to textile recycling, you have to break down all those fibers in order to make a new fabric. And it's up until recently, it's been pretty much impossible to take a poly cotton, which all of our stuff has some sort of synthetic now because of fast fashion. So it's all a blend, and that's why it's been hard to advance textile recycling. So they've figured it out, and they just they're building a scalable model. So I think my hope, and I track it, I'm like such a textile recycling nerd, like I track this stuff a lot, and it's really cool to see what's happening in that world. But until then, people donate their things, and I think a lot of it is with the idea that they're going to the right place. We're not doing anything bad by donating our clothes, or that's what we think, but a lot of it, like the majority of it, doesn't get sold in the United States and ends up overseas.
Yeah, I think what you're identifying is that fast fashion is almost like a symptom of overconsumption.
Oh, absolutely.
Where fast fashion is a problem, but even bigger is just the fact that we like keep feeling this pressure and keep getting sold this idea that more is going to solve everything. And I think It just feels, maybe these are the spaces I'm in, but it does feel like more and more there are people that are having these moments of this is too much. This is
Yeah.
actually so overwhelming. And like you said with the returns, you're like, what is the point? What am
Yeah.
I even
I'm
doing?
like,
And
this is
and I
so dumb.
remember reading something about returns too. They don't always just go back on the
Oh,
shelf.
never. No, they don't. They usually don't. So if something is returned that's from like a fast retailer like Amazon
Right.
or fast fashion or anything like that, oftentimes it's more expensive to restock it, reprocess it back into their inventory, take it to whatever store or redistribution center it needs to go to, and then sell it again. A lot of times it's been used and they can't sell it. So it gets trashed. Or there, I saw the other day that there's like these businesses that are like exploding all over the country, and they're resellers for these big box stores. So they'll buy a bunch of their returned items and then sell them in an actual like strip mall store, and you can get iPads and all this stuff for really cheap because it's a revenue source for these retailers. I need to find the source because I was like, what?
So interesting because I'm
It
like,
is.
okay, then maybe that stuff's not going to landfill, but also
Yeah,
this needs to not be produced.
exactly. No, exactly. Exactly. It's just this, there's so many elements to the problem. There's the overproduction element, there's the overconsumption element, there's the over donation or over purging element. I think I'm really excited that more people are interested and more people care, because that's where the change is going to be made. There were a couple really exciting pieces of legislation, one that passed in California and one that I think is still floating around in New York, but they're big. The one in California is called the one in New York is called the Fabric Act. The one in California is the California Garment Workers Act. And interestingly, I have a friend who has a brand now. She makes hemp towels. Her company is called Anact, ANACT. And hemp is like one of the easiest, most sustainably, a crop that is just less resource heavy than so many other crops that are grown. And the United States just allowed hemp to be grown again in the United States. But anyway, she used to work for a big retailer, and she would travel all around the world and visit these factories that were producing their product. And she said that some of the worst factories she ever went to were in Los Angeles. So a lot of people don't understand that there's issues here too. It's not just
Right.
overseas. So in California, they just passed this act, I think last year or the year before, that just it gave more rights to the garment workers. There was a minimum wage enacted. There were certain like safety and health rules and regulations in place. So that was really big for the garment workers.
Yeah.
And then in New York, the Fabric Act, I don't want to misspeak here, but I think basically if it were to be passed, it would make any store retailer who has a storefront in New York have to have 80 to 90% transparency about their supply chain, which is
Wow.
because if you think about it, Zara's in New York. And if they want to continue to
Oh,
sell
shit.
in New York, they're going to have to show all these things throughout their supply chain. It hasn't passed yet, but there's a lot of good momentum. So I try and stay current with all
Yeah.
these different things that are happening because of the slow fashion movement, so that I can talk about them and people, it's interesting to me.
It's also a good way to not lose hope, in my opinion, as well. Doing this work, talking about veganism and the environment and mindfulness, sometimes it is a big old bummer to
Yeah.
read about what's going on in the world. That's not some secret, right? There's so much that it can feel like you're just a drop in the bucket.
Mhm.
And reminding ourselves, I follow a few Instagrams accounts that are like good environmental news that happened this week.
Yeah.
Those are so important.
Mhm.
And I think there's also an underestimation of what things can happen on a governmental level like that. There can be laws around fashion,
Oh yeah.
and there should be. And I think that
Yeah.
we forget that maybe we can even push for things on that level. Like Is that something that you encourage folks to look into more and more? Is, I don't know, the politics of
Yeah.
fashion?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said on my website, there is a tab that says learn, and there's several websites on there that if you are interested, you can get involved. Like you
Yeah.
can be a part of the movement. I would love to say that I'm out there and I'm marching and I'm picketing and I'm like doing all those things, but I feel like that kind of activism just does not, this sounds silly, but it just doesn't fit into my life right now. Like my priority is my kids and my family. And how can I still participate in activism on a day-to-day level? And so I think that's through education and just sharing what I learn along the way. I do think that I will have lots of opportunities to have a louder voice and speak
Mm.
about these things to a bigger audience. That's a goal. But for now, yeah, get involved. There's a Remake Our World. Like they're great. They are dedicated to this stuff. They are the people who are loud and one of the biggest voices in this industry. And it's super interesting. I don't know if it's because I compartmentalize or I've never felt that. I feel like I'll never lose hope. I feel like it's not productive, if that makes any sense. Like the feelings are real. They should not be denied, but like how can we just be productive?
Yeah, it's such a good point because I know there's been a lot of it feels like there's been a lot lately of just like, why are we trying? The report
Mhm.
of the plastic industry knew recycling wasn't working.
Oh, 100, yeah.
Taylor Swift took more private jet flights than like you and I'll take for emissions in our life. And I'm
I
not
know.
sorry, Taylor, that she's one of many, but she got a lot of publicity for it.
Right.
But you see those things and you're like, oh, what am I doing? It's so easy to get into that. But what I keep coming back to for myself and to share with others is this, when has change ever come from the top down first?
Totally.
Literally never. So it's because of conversations like this. It's
Mhm.
because of people that are in the street marching and picketing. It's because of a shared article on Facebook. Love what you shared about activism because it can look different and you can be doing a lot in those different things. And it doesn't have to, it can be aligned for your life, but don't
Right.
think that you can't make any difference because it's going to be a bunch of individuals.
Yeah, voting, signing petitions, just like little, not little things, those are really big things, but
They feel little. They
yeah,
feel, I don't know, does this even matter?
but like they do matter. And I think people do get discouraged by the lack of what's going to happen. What's this little vote going to happen? What's this little signature? And that's valid, that's fair. I think we're overexposed to media, and so we see all these like crazy different things happening in the world, and we're like, what's the point? For me, I just have never been someone who has been discouraged by things that I can't control. I know I can't control it. But what can I control? And that's what's going to make me feel better about whatever decision I'm making or whatever choice I'm making.
I'm just gonna
Um,
have to listen to that sound clip when I have anxiety. What does Emily say? What can I
yeah,
control?
do it.
It's so helpful in staying grounded
Yeah,
because it can get very, like I said, it can get very like, what's the point? And not in a like a in a existential way, but maybe a little bit.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the eco anxiety, like that is very real. And I think one of the things that drew me to your account was that the way you're sharing is giving me what I can do. And that is so helpful. Like the rule of five,
yeah,
you and Sabs, Cots that I had on the podcast a while back, also started posting about it right at the same time. And I was like, what is this?
yeah,
And so something like that, so simple, seemingly, I would love for you to share a little bit more about what that is
yeah,
because
for sure.
it's a big deal. It can be a big
It
impact.
is. Yeah, so I came across the rule of five by this. Actually, a friend sent me Tiffany Dark, her account. She's a fashion writer out of the UK, and she created the rule of five. And it's based off this study that was published in 2022 by the Hot or Cool Institute, and that's out of Copenhagen. And
Okay.
they did extensive research into consumption all over the world. And they particularly looked at the G20 countries. and they have all the numbers and all the data and all the science, and they figured out that it's a pretty lengthy study. I love to read stuff like that. It's pretty dense, but they did such a good job of making it like an approachable read. It's free.
Cool.
You can access it from the internet. They basically calculated that if we want to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, we can buy 5 things a year.
Clothes.
Clothing, new clothing. So if the fashion industry wants to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and reduce their emissions by a certain amount to meet that goal, this is what we have to do. Because with every piece of clothing, there's emissions, right? They're in production, in growth of material, in shipping, in even like washing your clothes, like the energy and all those things. So they figured it out. It's basically a guide for the fashion industry, but also for consumers. So if we want the industry to meet its goals for the Paris Agreement, 5 items is really the max. Tiffany, who is a fashion writer, her work is in fashion. She really challenged herself and challenged her following to do this. And so I did it in 2023 and I was doing really great. I actually was a relief because I felt like because I wasn't thinking about clothes or shopping, I was not scrolling, I was not going out to stores. Like I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so it was not hard in the beginning. And then like the fall winter season, I struggled, which totally makes sense because I'm a California, Texas girl. Like I do not like cold weather. It's always been a struggle for me to dress and make that transition. Like I forget how to layer. I'm so annoyed. So that was the point in which I really struggled and I bought a few more things than the guideline was 5. So I think in the end, I bought 8 new pieces of clothing, which I'm still super proud of because it's way less than I would have had I not been doing the challenge. Now I'm doing it again for 2024 and I'm like really determined to make it. And I think I'm positive I will. I think that was my like practice run and now this is like the real thing.
Yeah, it was just so I saw it at the beginning of the year and I was like, I really want to talk to you and I want to talk about this on the podcast. And now we're recording and this will come out in March. But I think I'm trying to think the only thing I've bought is a used Prince costume for my birthday.
Amazing.
I
Wait,
think
that's so fabulous.
the beginning of the year. Now, granted, part of it, yes, online shopping has changed the game, but part of it is also I live in very northern Minnesota in the woods. So the closest mall is 2 hours.
Yeah.
So definitely there's, especially growing up, it's just proximity.
Right.
But shopping online, that changed the game. So that doesn't really matter anymore. But I think I want to throw my hat in the ring. I think when this episode comes out, I'll make a post and chat about it and share about it because I might as well do that and talk about it.
You already are.
Because I'm not really, yeah. Thank you for watching me make a realization in real
You're like,
time.
aha. The cool thing is that anyone can start at any time of the year. You just reset and then you look at the seasons that are outlined for the rule of 5 and you're like, okay, I already bought my thing for this season. Next season, it's one more. And so you don't have to start in January. You can start at any time. I actually, when I first heard about it, it was like mid-January or even like early February. And I had already bought a few things and I just canceled those out.
Yep.
I was like, here we are, we're starting fresh. And it's for anyone at any stage in the year.
I appreciate that. And I also think it's fun to have a challenge, right?
Yeah.
There is something about being like, oh, this is a part of that challenge or that goal, whatever word feels aligned for people, that intention.
That's an interesting thing. I think so. What I've also seen in this space is people doing no buy years, which is like you don't buy anything for a whole year. And I actually think that can be really, it's not damaging because I actually don't know, but I do think that it sounds like diety to me, where you're like, I'm not gonna have carbs, I'm not gonna have sugar. And it's okay if you buy it, it's okay. You can indulge.
Yeah.
People who are doing that obviously have their own reasons, but that's something where I think people are like, that's really intimidating. I'm like, I agree. I would never do that.
I couldn't agree more. And that's part of the inception of this podcast and the name Consciously Clueless was when I started learning about all of these things about the environment, about like really diving in and making all those connections. It was just like, hats off to people who can do this. This is no shade. But I knew I wasn't going to fit 1 year's worth of trash in a jar. And so like that was, I remember that was like a big thing for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
which again is incredible. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
it
And
is.
the trash I produce now is so much less than I did a few years ago.
Right.
But still, that all or nothing mentality, like you said, that it sounds diety, where
It
you're
does.
like, then if you give yourself a number, you can fluctuate. But if you have this nothing goal and you do one thing, you feel like shit.
Yes. Yes. Like anything, when you're making a change, like you want to give yourself grace, you want to give yourself room to make mistakes and figure out like what works best for you. Like what is going to help you succeed?
Right.
So I think the rule of five is an excellent start. And like I said, I'm someone who shopped all the time and was an overconsumer, and now I find it really easy.
Can I ask a couple questions about the challenge?
Sure.
So it was 5 new things.
Yeah.
So secondhand is
Yeah,
free unless you
that
overdo it.
yeah, so that is a very common question. It's a common question. So some of the exceptions are socks, underwear, like things, necessities like that. Although they say obviously don't go overboard, don't buy a million different socks.
I can't buy anything. I'm buying all socks.
Yeah, exactly. So use good judgment with that. And then secondhand, the study, going back to the study, it doesn't specifically say any kind of like limit for secondhand, but some people who are doing the challenge also limit their secondhand pieces. So I think for Tiffany, who started it, she's limiting her secondhand purchases to 4. I have not limited my purchases, and I actually was planning on tracking them for 2024 and haven't, because I'm still building a wardrobe. Like I said, I used to purge like crazy. And
Yeah.
so I had a very small closet. So now that I'm like consciously making these choices, like there are holes in my closet where I feel like there's a need for things. So it's like I don't feel the need to limit my secondhand purchases, but I understand that some people do. It would be interesting for a study to come out that talked about that, though. I think that would be really informative. That's the short answer. Short
Yeah.
and long.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Secondhand's free game. What about, I know I think I saw this when you were answering questions about it, but I think it's one that
Yeah.
probably comes up too. What about gifts for people?
Yeah. So gifts are a no, which was super hard for my mom because she's a gifter and she loves to buy me clothes. Had a conversation with her. It's like this becomes an opportunity to talk to your network and your community about what you're doing.
Yes.
And she was totally understanding, and I think she's very supportive, and she asks me what I want for my birthday, and as I get older, I don't really want anything. Like I want to experience things. So this year, she and I are going to New York together. So that's my present. Yeah. It's like so grateful that I have the opportunity to do that and she's willing to do that with me. I feel really lucky. She's such an important person in my life. And yeah, it just looks a little bit different when you're celebrating things. I've struggled with how I want to talk about like gifting people. So I have certain brands that I'm very loyal to. There's 2 in particular. And I usually say no to any kind of collaboration with any kind of clothing company. But these 2 brands, like I really feel strongly about supporting them and making them known to whoever's watching me, because these are the brands that like I want them to succeed. Like I want to support them. So I'm still like trying to figure out, like they've gifted me a couple things. Actually, no, that's not true. Each one has gifted me one thing this year. And I haven't necessarily counted them towards my rule of 5 because I just feel conflicted.
Yeah.
I guess that's just how I'm going to end up talking about it. So I personally haven't bought anything, but I have been gifted these 2 pieces of clothing that I'm like, I'm going to wear these to death. Maybe they are included in my rule of 5. Maybe that's how I'm going to do this. So I'm still trying to figure out how I want to approach that. In the meantime, I haven't bought anything. So I haven't gone over at this point.
How do you navigate that? There's this juxtaposition of you're talking about the study that says if we want to keep on target, or if like the fast fashion or fashion industry wants to be less shitty to the environment, basically, then this is what has to happen. How do you balance figuring out like, so that's these few brands are causing all of this chaos. And so
Yeah.
not putting all of the onus on the individual.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's this greenwashing thing that then
Oh,
comes
yeah.
from all of these, either from the companies like that, what is it, Exxon or whatever, the guy was quoted the other day. Some gas company was like, yeah, people should really do better for the environment. And you're like, okay. So how do you balance that without feeling, oh, it's the individual's fault, holding places accountable?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? Because I still am figuring that out actively.
Well, first of all, I believe it's never the individual's fault. If you
Agreed.
are like unknowingly making choices that are not good for the environment, you're just like everybody else. Like we have been greenwashed. We have been marketed in a very specific way. Like fast fashion brands benefit from us not knowing these things, right? So
Right.
they're going to keep it hidden as much as they possibly can. That's not on us. So I think it's just recognizing that most of us are just doing the best we can.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of and because I was in a position where I was a consumer without a lot of knowledge about these things, like I relate to most people
Yeah.
who feel that similar way. So the pressure really isn't meant to ever be on an individual for making, and that's why I say, like, I have tons of friends who are not doing this, the rule of five. They follow my stuff and they're so proud of me, but like they still shop and like
That's
it's
cute.
okay. Like I still love you. Like,
Yeah.
it's not your fault, but this is what I do. And maybe at one point you'll feel similarly.
Right.
So it is a balance, like you said. I think bringing to light some of these things that are being uncovered with oil and gas and all the other controversies that are happening behind the scenes is important, and people like you and me and lots of other creators are that's like the goal, is to just
Right.
enlighten more people and have conversations that help us have an understanding and then just do what we can in our daily life, and that's really all we can do.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I think we, not just you and I, but can sometimes underestimate what those daily actions add up to.
Mm-hmm.
And just sticking to those things you know to be true or that is what you can do in your life every single day is, I'm saying this like to myself, you're doing a good job. The individual
Yeah.
things you do every
Well,
day.
it's a spectrum, really. I think people who think about sustainability, or people who are vegan, or people who do things that might seem extreme to them, they assume that's the only way, and I can't do that, so why do anything? But
Yes.
it's this full spectrum. Like maybe all you can handle in your life right now is composting.
Right.
Maybe all you can handle in your life is an electric car. Like whatever it is,
Mhm.
like start somewhere and
And
build
don't
from that.
stop.
Yeah, and just build upon that. And I think you say this all the time, where it's like when you're making healthier choices for yourself, you're making healthier choices for the environment. I think that's like a genius way to start, where you're maybe the goal wasn't to necessarily, maybe the goal was to make healthier choices for yourself, and then boom, like you're doing all these other wonderful things too.
Yeah, I think that that's what keeps me going in this work and excited about this work, even when it's hard too, is just that, oh yeah, every time I take care of myself, I'm actively taking care of the world around me. And if I can do that, then I can do a little bit more.
Sure.
And I think there's a whole nother conversation about what's going on in the world at any given point, but especially right now, it feels so extra heavy. And so not getting lost in the what you can't do is crucial for your own mental health too.
Totally. The two things that really were the biggest takeaways when I was doing my master's program in social work
Mhm.
was, and it's funny because I feel like somehow even though it, sustainability and fashion was never a career for me, like a lot of the stuff I learned was translated very well. So,
Mhm.
like for me, the two things that I just remember hearing on the first day of school were self care and meeting a client where they're at. And that's been true for this journey, where or just like in motherhood and life and like being married, self-care sounds so, parents generation would be like, what? So important, and it can look so different for different people. And what a gift it is to yourself to like recognize when you need that. And then meeting someone where they're at is you're not gonna make change if you're just like putting upon information on someone who's not ready to hear it. Like, where are they? What are they ready to hear? Are they not ready to hear anything? That's where you're actually going to make some productive change.
Is there anything for this episode that you want to share that I haven't given you space to do?
No, I think that even someone like me or you, who we really care and we're doing all this work, like we still have challenges. I think the data shows that the two biggest ways that you can make an impact individually is eating less meat and traveling less. Mm-hmm. And so I don't eat meat, but I travel and I love to travel and I want to show my kids the world. So we all have challenges. It's never going to look perfect. That's okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. I loved it. Thank you for having me.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless, and for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this new episode, and if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or tag me and share in social media. Share this episode with others who may be interested in this topic. To get more resources, influence on topics covered, and bonus content, join the Consciously Clueless community over on Patreon at patreon.com/consciouslycarly. And don't forget, if you need help living more consciously, let's work together. Email me today. See you next Wednesday for a new episode.